Hello, everybody. Good morning in Madrid. Thank you for being connected today with us. My name is Maria Osman. I'm Director of Global Education Initiatives at IE. And it is a pleasure to introduce this panel within the Leading in Complex Times dialogue series we've put in place. It is a pleasure to have this panel on The Future of Work Has Arrived. And we're very lucky to have three amazing panelists today, starting with Amélie de Marcilly, who is the Academic Director of the IE Center for Health, Wellbeing and Happiness. And we have two of our most popular Vice Deans, who are Norman Curtis, who is the Vice Dean of Behavior and Talent on the School of Human Science and Technology, and Borja González de Regueral, who is the Vice Dean for Data Science and Technology within the School of Human Science and Technology as well. Okay, so what is the structure going to be? Amélie, Norman, and Borja will have the conversation, and we'll open the floor for questions and answers at the end. Okay, so the session will take about like 35 minutes. It's going to be a very interactive dialogue, and then we can open the floor for questions and answers. Right? So thank you very much for being connected, and I'll be back after the panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel. Maria, thank you very much for the introduction. I hope that you are all, wherever you are, healthy and safe. That is the new greeting for these days, is hoping that everyone is doing well. And of course, since the onset of this crisis of the COVID-19, we went from discussing, the future of work, and now we're actually living it. So as we look into the questions that we've asked ourselves for this panel, which we hope will be of interest to you, we want to think about what are the consequences on the behaviors that we have at work, and what are the technological changes that are required to make sure that we are able to manage this new reality or this renewed focus on how we behave online and what the technology can do for us, right? And so for that, we have, as Maria said, two of our top professors at IE University. We're very proud to have them on the panel this morning. So first of all, as Maria said, we have Norman Curtis, who's currently the Vice Dean of Behavior and Human, he's the guy who's waving his hand right now, yes. Behavior and Human Development is his specialty. He's a professor of Behavior and Consumer Insights in the School of Human Science and Technology. And before IE, Norman worked at Accenture, and because consulting is a bit about changing behaviors, he developed a particular interest in that. And then he spent most of his career helping clients make better decisions based on consumer and voters' behavior. As notably, he was the CEO of Ipsos in Spain, and therefore leading the transformation of business processes in this market research company. He has got an MBA from London Business School, and of course has a training in finance. Our second distinguished panelist this morning is Borja Regueral. Welcome. So he's the other guy waving, the one with the glasses. So he's the Vice Dean of Data Science and Technology. So very focused on what we're going to talk about today. He's a professor of Data Science and Innovation, and also a member of the Human Science and Technology School at IE. Before he joined IE, Borja worked at BP, and he was leading the global digital transformation and implementation of that digital transformation out of London. So he spent most of his professional career working on innovation and technology, together with how you improve a business and develop new business lines enabled by technology. So he's got a PhD in thermoeconomics, and he's actually developed a patent as well, and and written various books and articles. So hopefully you will have interesting questions. We're going to start kicking this off a little by starting with a question for you, Norman. And we talked about the change that is coming about with COVID, and what changes do you see happening from a human behavior perspective?
Well, thank you very much, Amélie, for that introduction. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Like Amélie said, I hope you're all safe. So the question, key changes in human behavior. First, at a fundamental level. At a fundamental level, the impact of COVID is a negative impact. Okay? Overall, we can say it has a negative effect on human behavior. There are some positive effects, and I'll talk to them about them at the end. So the biggest negative effect, of course, is having to live with uncertainty due to two main reasons: health issues of you or your loved ones or people you know, and of course, the financial situation, which is affecting many people directly or indirectly. It could be that your business is in serious trouble, or the company you work for, or it could be that you are a supplier to a company that is in serious trouble or a serious need. Okay, so this fear of the unknown, of what's going to happen tomorrow, whether I will be able to pay my bills next month, etc., leads usually in human beings to anxiety. Okay, so anxiety is on the rise. Sometimes panic. Okay, and we see some small signals of panic. For example, when people start buying 1,000 euros worth of toilet paper. Okay, on day one of the pandemic, for example, that's panic buying. Okay, now there's an increase in anxiety and psychological stress. On top of that, this could be amplified, or it could be exacerbated because of the lack of information or the wrong information. So, as we all know, we have to be careful with what we read, what we believe, etc. Now, of course, if you are infected, it's even a worse situation. If your family is infected, you could have traumatic stress, confusion. You could be angry at the world, at society, at the government, at the sanitary system, at the origin of the virus, etc. So we have uncertainty that could lead to anxiety, panic, stress. And then also at some signals that we see in society, and we've learned also from what has happened in the past. Of course, in 2008, the last crisis, for example, there was a strong increase in alcohol consumption, illegal drugs, and domestic and family violence, for example. And some people, I'm sure you've heard, are saying that one of the negative consequences of lockdown is the increase in some of these indicators. Okay, increase of illegal substance abuse and family violence. For example, in the U.S., after the 2008 crisis, the number of suicides, okay, due to employment went up 13%. Okay, so there's also an increase in suicides, very often related to unemployment or financial situation. There was a recent study done by McKinsey a few weeks ago. I think it's from the end of March, beginning of April, where in the U.S. approximately 1 in 4 have recognized binge drinking, and 1 person in 7 taking illegal drugs. Okay, in the last 3-4 days. So there's some strong negative impacts on behavior. Of course, there's some positive impacts. Okay, and first of all, some people have been able to reconnect with their family and friends because of lockdown. Okay, so it's quieted the pace a little bit in some cases. It's brought us into our homes, more balance between work and home, which allows us to reconnect with many people, and that's probably one of the main positive impacts. Now, everybody's talking about one word regarding human behavior, which is resilience. This concept of needing to build resilience. This is a crisis like many of us have never faced before. Maybe our grandparents had because of post-World War or lived during the big wars. But our generation, most of us have never lived through a crisis like this. So resilience is something that all of us will have to continue to build and continue to work on. When we're thinking about the new normal or the next normal, okay, we're going to have to draw from our own inner strength and compassion to be able to help those in need and also build our own resilience. Okay. So I'd just like to end on a couple of things that I'd like to mention. There's also perhaps some long-lasting effects that people are talking about. So when we talk about how is this going to change life going forward? Well, perhaps one of the things that is going to change is that We're going to live more for the present and less for the future. This crisis has made many people think about their priorities. What is really important for them? What is not that critical? What they could live without that they didn't realize? Is it really necessary to be hyper-connected, for example, or not? Is it necessary to work X hours a day, or not see your friends, or not see your family for weeks and weeks because you're traveling or you're working on other stuff? So perhaps more carpe diem, if you will, more living the present. This has implications for consumption, of course, as we'll talk about later, because you might delay purchases that you were thinking about for the future because you're not that concerned with the future. Related to that, perhaps a trend to a simpler life. We have all reconnected. I said toilet paper was the panic buying at the beginning. Now it's at least in some countries, what has increased 600, 700% in sales is flour, okay, to bake, to make cakes and make cookies, okay. So this is reconnecting you with your home, reconnecting you with activities at home with your family, and doing things together, and not ordering out, not eating out, baking at home, okay. This has implications on weight and exercise, etc., but we'll talk about those later. And finally, one which is perhaps a bit more controversial, which usually comes up when there's a big crisis, is the rise of spirituality. With the big recession in 2008, there was also many people thought that spirituality would grow significantly. Actually, it did not. Okay, so overall, it more or less remained stable. It had a peak, but then it remained stable again. There was a Gallup poll done first week in April, again in the US, and they asked people what has gotten better or worse due to the COVID crisis. And they asked people about things like mental health, diet, exercise, and spirituality. And the one that grew the most was spirituality. Okay, so approximately 20% of US citizens said that they had become more spiritual because of this crisis. It obviously does not mean you go to church more often, because in fact, you cannot go to many churches in many countries around the world because of the lockdown. But there could be a rise in spirituality. So those would be the three, if you will, more long-term trends. Living more the present more than the future, a simpler life, and perhaps spirituality rising.
Thank you, Norman. That's very interesting indeed. So how do you think this impacts how we work, or how the future of work might develop?
Well, like you said, I mean, we are at the future of work, okay? And this session is on LinkedIn Live, which is a new platform for me, okay? So I've learned Zoom, Hangouts, WebEx, Adobe Connect, etc. And now I'm learning LinkedIn Live, so we're adapting to this on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure many of our viewers are expert users, but probably some are not. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen in the future of work? Of course, everybody's talking about telework. Okay, so what's going on with telework? Just to put it in perspective, because of course, many of us are teleworking right now, perhaps momentarily, perhaps on a more permanent basis. Okay, we'll see how that evolves, and that's the debate. How much is telework going to increase? My personal opinion, it is going to increase across countries. How much is the debate? But just to give you the stats, the statistics, Eurostat has published recently, and publishes every year actually, the updated statistics on percentage of people teleworking by country. For example, in Spain, only 3% of the population teleworks on a regular basis. Okay, the European average is 10%. Okay, so European average is 10% of people teleworking on a regular basis. Spain, 3%. Highest country, Sweden, 28%. Okay, other countries closer to Spain, like France, 14%. Portugal, 9%. Okay, Italy, 1%. One of the only countries below Spain. Okay, because Spain is very low at 3%. So of course, most people think, and I would agree, that teleworking is going to increase. This experience of lockdown has made many companies, of course, have to go to telework very quickly, with some quirks at the beginning and some adjustments. But in general, most people think it's working relatively well from a company perspective and from an employee perspective. So probably will increase going forward. This could help, for example, balance personal and professional life. So that's an important aspect. that hopefully will stay, so we can help employees balance those two components through telework. It could reduce stress if you're able to balance that better, because it's a big cause of stress to know that you have to take your child to the doctor this afternoon and you're in a meeting, you can't get out of the meeting, I have to call somebody to take them, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that could work. Of course, like everything that has a pro, there's a con. I mean, the con here, the flip side, is that there are also many reports that say that this could increase to burnout. Being connected 24/7, we know is not good, with or without lockdown. But the lockdown has increased or maximized the probability that this occurs because there's no place to go. So a lot of people are hyper-connected. This, again, could lead to stress, anxiety due to burnout. Of course, we're not going to talk about it today. Amelie is the expert as the head of the Center for Health, Wellbeing, and Happiness, but there's many tips. And she wrote a good article about this, if you want to check it out, by the way. There's many good tips about how to manage working remotely. Okay, so you need to find your space, quiet space to work, establish your routine, take breaks, engage in physical activity, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many things you can do to avoid this burnout. If we talk about specifically what's going to happen in the office, okay, in the virtual office or in the office once we're back in our jobs. For example, since there's going to be more telework, we don't know by how much, but probably significantly more, virtual networking will become more important. So it won't be as important to form personal relationships. It will become more important to start creating those virtual relationships. And those people who are able to engage with others virtually and develop meaningful connections, others could be your fellow employees, could be your team members, could be your boss, could be your suppliers, could be other stakeholders. With all of them, okay, that's going to become an important skill, okay? Then, of course, there's also being more structured in your communication. I think all of us feel that in the virtual world, we need to be more concise. It's more difficult to pay attention for a long period of time to a screen. So it requires structured communication, short, to the point, wherever possible. And of course, we need to be more sustainable also going forward, okay? We have to take care of the environment, take care of the community. There are some companies already that are publishing what they're doing for their communities with the COVID crisis, and advertising on their websites or even on television, money they've donated or particular actions they're taking with their employees or with their communities. But I think also sustainability is going to grow in importance.
Thank you, Norman. And indeed, sustainability is a topic that's come a lot up in the news and in companies and in discussions. So, Borja, how can we adapt technology to make the future more sustainable?
Actually, I think that's one of the key learnings that we have had from a COVID perspective. We have seen that although activity levels were abnormally low, what the huge impact it could have in sustainability and in climate change the moment that we were stopping our activities. Of course, we have to get back to a level that is sustainable from an economic perspective, sustainable from a human perspective, and sustainable from a global or planetary perspective. In this case, the tech sector is different to the other sectors in two ways. The first one is the one that is reducing the carbon footprint. So basically, they are reducing CO2 systematically and consistently every single year, achieving up to 2% of the CO2 emissions by 2030. And there are already companies that are totally renewable in terms of the data centers, etc. For example, British Telecom is already running 100% renewable. We see that Amazon is moving in the same direction, and Google, etc. In this case, and I think that is like maybe it's the key thing in terms of like sustainability and the link with technology is not only the use of renewable energies, but also how the technology sector can improve the carbon footprint or reduce the carbon footprint that other sectors have on it. It's like there's a very interesting study from GC, that is an NGO that relates technology and sustainability. And basically what they're saying is by every ton of CO2 emitted by the tech sector, 10 tons of CO2 are reduced across sectors. And this has to do with with connected technologies. Basically, if we're running on renewables, at the end of the day, it's like we will need to fit supply and demand in an intermittent supply. And basically for that, it's like we need smart grids, and basically we will be leveraging on technology. On the other side, using the interconnection in terms of car sharing will can reduce up to 20 million cars off the roads. But this has to go through a more meaningful way of building that technology across the supply chain. No? On one side, we have to think about solutions that in the past, maybe we were just like throwing them and see how they were running. Maybe we're able to run super algorithms that have to do with AI, but at the end of the day, it's like we don't know the implications that it can have. Not only the good things, but on the bad side, when we're doing our cost-benefit analysis, it's like we have to consider the implications that it has for sustainability. I can recall one of the key examples in my case, for example, it was blockchain as one of the enablers for new solutions. It sounded very promising, but if you really take everything into consideration, if you really take the impact that it has into consideration, the first blockchain that was built, the Bitcoin blockchain, had effects that were devastating from an energy efficiency perspective on the planet. Basically, all miners working at the same time was counterintuitive if you take into the equation the sustainability side.
Yeah, thank you, Borja. And I was amazed when I found out about the energy consumption of blockchain. It was completely counterintuitive to how efficient it was going to be to change, the way we do business and do a lot of public information management, etc. So on this note, how is the need for a sustainable future changing another important aspect, which is customer demand?
I think that's a key point, and that's going to be a key point across sectors. On one side, we can see that all companies more and more are conscious about sustainability, and are conscious about sustainability, of course, with the sustainability development goals and how they're working on them, but also in the use of technology in terms of how demand and supply are getting together. Now more and more demand are getting to be part of that blurry border between the company and the clients or customers. And in this case, we can see how they are demanding, and that demand is demanding more and more sustainability ethics, to call it somehow, from companies, to the extent that it can give them a competitive edge in terms of being the ones that are selected by the customers. We could see that before in the past, and I'm not talking about far away, I'm talking about 5 years, maximum 6, 7 years. It was not something that was part of the other winners when customers were choosing a product or were choosing an experience or a service. But now more and more is something that is coming to the equation and is one of the top priorities, and it's at the higher part of the list. We can see, for example, that a company like Telefónica, it's including in their RFPs the need for a sustainable provider, or green provider, in terms of the offers that they have to receive, and that impacts the whole supply chain. It's something that is like cascades down the supply chain. So basically, that provider will ask another provider, and will ask another provider, which has a multiplier effect in terms of our concern, and also it has an effect on the demand that will demand more and more this sustainability aspect of everything that they need during the day.
And Norman, did you want to add anything to this particular question?
That was a very good
You need to unmute himself, yeah.
Sorry, okay, thank you. So the Telefonica example is a good example of how companies are incorporating into the request for proposals, sustainability factors. But as a consumer or as a business, what we have seen growing significantly for the last 10 years are companies that are basing their business model, or at least one of their key levers, is a sustainability component. Okay, so one of the first companies to do this was people like The Body Shop 30 years ago, where they did, okay, we do no animal treatment products. Okay, so they were one of the first to actually leverage that significantly. So they are actually quite a precursor in that. Then you have companies like Tom's, for example, which is about 10, 12 years old. Where they sell shoes. Okay, so every shoe they sell, they give back in Argentina to a community so that they have money to grow the community. But now we see it in everything. We see, for example, banks. Many banks that now have sustainability or giving back to the community component, where you decide where part of the margin, part of the profit goes to a particular type of project. NGO or activity that you think is relevant. So I think, like Borja said, going forward from a customer perspective, we are going to place even more importance on this component. And I think what the crisis has made us aware of is that we have been destroying the planet. There are places in the world now that are different than 2 months ago. Okay, Venice is one of them, which was recently in the news. There have been fish discovered in the channels of Venice that hadn't been seen in many, many years. Okay, just because there haven't been any people there for the last 2 months. And of course, pollution in cities, et cetera, et cetera. So I just think that that's going to be more and more important going forward.
Thank you, Norman. And I hope, yes, indeed, companies will start pledging carbon neutral policies in the coming future, as there are already many of them doing that, but probably more will start doing it. So just another question before we open for the Q&A, and I see some of the questions coming in, so thank you very much for doing that. And Borja, how are new technologies going to shape the future of work in your view? Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
Well, I'm going to refer to the example that Norman was saying, right? So if we think about, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, or maybe by the end of last year, it's like most of us would not be aware of all the different platforms that exist and how they are working for all of us within organizations and outside of organizations. We can see that these platforms are fostering collaboration between the whole supply chain in terms of having suppliers that are supported by companies in these tough moments of COVID. So basically, it will also help them to recover. When we're talking about ecosystems, we can see how you don't let them fall, but basically it's like you see how your supplier cannot fall because basically you will fall too. So that is fostering closer relationships or tighter relationships between the whole value chain that is delivering us an experience. On top of that, it's like if I go into the organization, it's like we can see that there are going to be like hybrid work styles. Basically, it's like we will be working online, we will be working offline, and most probably in both of them. And that will be in structures that for some services will be decentralized and for others will be centralized. To the extent in which we're doing it, it's not going to be a matter of technology. Technology there will only be an enabler. So at the end of the day, as always, it's how we use it in order to foster the best out of us and the best of those organizations. Maybe just to get an aspect on that, on the talent side, I think that more and more profiles that have a T-shape will be required in terms of having people that have a wide diversity of backgrounds, but also with the core expertise, of course, but basically that they're broad in terms of the knowledge. It's like now we're not only talking about lawyers that know about law, but lawyers that will know about law and will have to know about technology and will have to know something about cybersecurity and of course about the business function. So basically we see how the functions are coming together, and that's fostering a new way of working. And basically it's like the new way in which we are interrelating with each other and collaborating in terms of achieving a solution that works for all of us. It also, on the other side, not everything is nice. It makes us think about, of course, issues as relevant as data protection and data privacy. How is it going to be in the near future? Now, as a short-term example, we're seeing that maybe we are tracked in terms of where we're going and what we're doing to see if we have COVID or not, or we are at risk. So basically, in that case, it's like, is it something that is going to last forever? Is it something that is going to last only in the short term? And how we should be managing, and how should regulation and regulators being the ones that are managing that collaborate with different companies in a more fluid relationship in terms of companies and government to see how we achieve a common and a good solution for all of us.
But Norman, did you want to add anything to this aspect, and just in terms of how we manage and the challenges that organizations are going to face?
Yes, I mean, I think organizations are facing many challenges, and some of them, most of them existed pre-COVID, just to be clear. So, I mean, COVID here could be a catalyst, could be an accelerator, but many of these trends have been going on for several years now. I mean, we talk about, going digital. Well, we've been talking about digital transformation for many years already. Okay, we talk about other things, but probably I think that the three most significant, if you will, from my perspective, The first one is around the organization itself and the processes. So I think what COVID will accelerate, or the post-COVID world, or the new future of work, are more horizontal, more collaborative, less hierarchical, more flexible, more team-oriented organizations. Okay, more agile, if you will. Okay, of course, another trend that was already occurring, but still slow, is centralization versus decentralization. So I think the new world of work is going to be more decentralized. Okay, just because of the way that people are going to be working remotely, more people in different locations, etc. And another important aspect around process or organization is perhaps how the decision process works. How are decisions made? So I think we're gonna step away even further from consensus-based decision making, slow decision making, to more autonomous, more agile decision making. So I think those are probably three important components under org structure and process. Then there's a second component which is critical, I think, that we all recognize, which is leadership. How does the leadership need to behave in this world? When you speak to leaders now, many of them are spending a lot more time with their people, with their employees, with their stakeholders, because it's a time of uncertainty. Like I said at the beginning, it's a time of crisis, and people need to be looked after, and people need to feel like the company cares about them. So empathy is very important. I read somewhere that now CEO is Chief Empathy Officer. Okay, we always change the word, the E for the CEO. In this case, it's empathy, Chief Empathy Officer. So probably requires more delegation, it requires more trust. We know building trust is complicated and maintaining that trust is complicated, but probably requires that from leaders. Also to show more vulnerability. Many leaders were a bit reticent about people not being in the office and working from home. Now they have to accept it, they have no choice. So learn about how other people are working from home, question how they work from home perhaps, but also learn from them. And of course, very important for many leaders is to lead by example, as always, but in this case, specifically about telework, to practice it, to live it, to talk to people, to insist that it's something that can work, how to make it work, adjust, etc. And the third and final point, so the first is around organizational structure process, the second about leadership, the third one, which I think is important, is around how we're going to measure performance going forward. And there's a strong trend towards being towards new models of measuring performance. Since physical presence, physical contact is going to be a bit less relevant, it's not going to matter whether they're your friend or whether you see them at the office all the time or the relationship you have. So you're going to develop virtual relationships. But on the other hand, real performance is going to become more critical when deciding who progresses or not at organizations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. I'm just going to jump in and with some of the many questions that we're receiving from the public, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. So there's a question around culture. So I'll stay with you, Norman, for a second, then I'll come to you, Borja. There's some questions around how is this going to affect our culture, and in particular, does the Latin culture, is it going to have to change? We'll stop hugging and kissing each other, but also and put more physical distance, and also other cultures that are perhaps more adapted to this change that we're doing, and by physical distancing ourselves and teleworking, etc.
This question is from Victor, no? I think. Okay, it's a good question, Victor. Culture is a big word. Okay, so culture is a big word. Depends what we interpret by culture. But in this case, I think Victor's point is around, are there countries that are better adapted to social distancing, which might become the new normal, that are better adapted to spending more time at home and doing fewer activities in large groups, etc.? I think intuitively, most of us would say yes. Some countries are perhaps more used to that kind of lifestyle, Northern European cultures perhaps, and some other countries. Definitely not Latin cultures or Spanish culture, probably not in that area. But I think that just like many countries have adjusted to lockdown relatively well, but lockdown is quite easy in a way, because it's an all or nothing. Okay, in this case, it's a nothing. Okay, so you stay home and that's it, and you only leave for emergencies. I think the true test is going to be this de-escalation now, right? This new phase as we go back to something a bit where we have more we spend more time outside, we go back to work in some capacities, etc. I think we're going to test really the culture and the discipline, right? And I think you can already see in some countries, and I think including Spain, where part of the population is becoming quite uneasy. And some governments, or local governments in particular, are also becoming a bit impatient with this phase. So up to now, there's been consensus that lockdown was necessary, but I think the next few weeks, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks, are going to be critical to see how society changes. Now, is it going to change our culture overall? I personally don't think so. I think 2 years down the road, once there's a vaccine, once everybody is more or less immunized and we live with this and we coexist with COVID as another virus that's out there, a bit more dangerous, but that we coexist with, I think Latins will continue to hug and kiss and embrace. Personally, that's my opinion based on what Victor was saying.
Well, I certainly hope so. Thank you, Norman. So, Borja, a question for you from Bernardo around data and sustainability. Is there space for building on sustainability and the use of data? So, any thoughts you want to share with the audience on this topic?
It's a very good reflection, Bernardo. So it's not a matter of having the space. I think that it's a must. As we can see with the sustainability development goals, when you're trying to get to the indexes, they are very complex indexes, and normally they were based in indirect measures. In this case, with access to different data points and having the capacity of processing it, at the end of the day, we're going to come to the old adagio, but with new technologies, right? If you can measure something, you can change it, because at the end of the day, you will be able to track it. So if we're talking about transforming companies, if we're going to talking about using data in terms of making them better, more user-centric, don't we think that we are able to use that data in terms of transforming the way in which we behave, at least to track it and be able to be more efficient in the policies that we're putting? I honestly believe that it should be a must, and there's more than space, there's a need in terms of using data analytics and predictive analytics in terms of being able to course correct and adapt to a more sustainable world.
Yeah, thank you. And we're almost running out of time, so I'm just going to close very quickly this session. I'm sure there would be a lot more dialogue that we could do on this interesting topic, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions because this is a moving target, right, as we go along. There was a comment also in the chat around how we look after employee well-being, and again, as the director of the Center for Health and Wellbeing and Happiness, I can only encourage that. We've done the same at the university and trying to accompany our students and our faculty and staff and actually our stakeholders to look after themselves and spend a bit of time to slow down and enjoy the present moment, as Norman was saying. But I think the decisions that we make today about our business to deal with this global crisis, and it's really the first time that we live a crisis like that, as the audience said today. What are we going to do to manage these devastating effects? And we saw some GDP drop numbers come in from Europe today. So what decisions are we making that are going to impact our lives in a pretty critical moment of business and personal life? So, as you said, I think there'll be a lot of trust issues between governments and within organizations. Companies are usually the trusted advisor or the trusted person in the relationship that we have with our environment and stakeholders. Definitely health is at the forefront of obvious reasons, but then I think that's something that's going to stick, is how we look after our health. And certainly at the center, I'm very interested in that, because there's nothing that goes separate from body and mental health, and generally our health goes together with how our body behaves. So there's also an economic innovation that or potential in health economy that probably will be on the rise. As you said, the huge opportunity for digitization, again, something that started many, many years ago. For those who have been in technology, we've heard about digitization forever. This is probably making it real and accelerating it in many ways. Sustainability, I guess, again, something not totally new, but accelerated. And the rising role of governance, I think, is another interesting topic and what was mentioned by both Borja and Norman. So again, as we close this session today, I just wanted to thank you warmly for being there. It's great we can't see you, but we feel you through your questions. We hope you found this session interesting. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Maria for closure. Thanking you again for joining this morning. And if you have any further questions, please reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very, very much to the three of you. Norman, I wanted to add something to your answer related to Latin Spanish cultures. I think there's going to be a huge change in the Spanish culture, because I don't know if everybody knows, but we used to kiss in a professional environment, and I think that's going to stop. It didn't make too much sense, but it was real. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes in Spanish culture. Again, thank you so much, Amélie, Norman, and Borja, for this really interesting dialogue. It's been really interesting, truly interesting, and very useful, I think, for many of us. Thank you all for being connected, and yeah, let's keep safe and let's keep in touch. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye.